Welcome back. We'll discuss speciation in this lecture. Darwin never actually discussed what he referred to as that mystery of mysteries, how one species gives rise to another. Rather, his argument concerned evolution by natural selection, that is, how one species evolves through time to adapt to its changing environment. Although an important mechanism of evolutionary change, the process of adaptation does not explain how one species becomes another, a process we call speciation. In statistics, maximum likelihood estimation is a method of estimating the parameters of a probability distribution by maximizing a likelihood function, so that under the assumed statistical model, the observed data is most probable. The point in the parameter space that maximizes the likelihood function is called maximum likelihood estimate. The logic of maximum likelihood is both intuitive and flexible, and as such, the method has become a dominant means of statistical inference. See the figure, a maximum likelihood tree for phylogenetic relationships of Melagaceae carnivores. Any concept of a species must account for two phenomena: the distinctiveness of species that occur together at a single locality, and the connection that exists among different populations belonging to the same species. Species that occur together, termed sympatric, are distinctive entities that are phenotypically different, utilize different parts of the habitat, and behave differently. Within a single species, individuals in populations that occur in different areas may be distinct from one another. Such groups of distinctive individuals may be classified as subspecies. Now, in 1942, the evolutionary biologist Ernst Mayr set forth the biological species concept, which defines species as groups of actually or potentially interbreeding natural populations, which are reproductively isolated from other such groups. Each species exchanges genetic material only with other members of its species. If sympatric species commonly exchange genes, which they generally do not, we might expect such species to rapidly lose their distinctions as the gene pools of the different species become homogenized. Conversely, the ability of geographically distinct populations of a single species to share genes through the process of gene flow may keep these populations integrated as members of the same species. The biological species concept says that a species is composed of populations whose members mate with each other and produce fertile offspring, or would do so if they came into contact. Conversely, populations whose members do not mate with each other, or who cannot produce fertile offspring, are said to be reproductively isolated and therefore are members of different species. If organisms cannot interbreed or cannot produce fertile offspring, they clearly belong to different species. However, some populations that are considered separate species can interbreed and produce fertile offspring. But ordinarily, they do not do so under such natural conditions. They are still considered reproductively isolated in that genes from one species generally will not enter the gene pool of the other. Even if two species occur in the same area, they may utilize different proportions of the environment and thus not hybridize, because they do not encounter each other. Because of their ecological and behavioral differences, lions and tigers rarely come into direct contact with one another, even though 150 years ago their ranges actually overlapped. Hybrids, such as the tiglon, have been successfully produced in captivity, but hybridization does not occur in the wild. Many species, such as frogs, birds, and a variety of insects, use sounds to attract mates. Predictably, sympatric species of these animals produce different calls. Other species rely on the detection of pheromones. The use of pheromones in moths have been particularly well studied. When female moths are ready to mate, they emit a pheromone that males can detect at great distances. Sympatric species differ in the pheromone they produce. Either they use different chemical compounds, or if using the same compounds, the proportions used are different. Laboratory studies indicate that males are remarkably adept at distinguishing the pheromones of their own species from those of other species, or even from synthetic compounds, similar but not identical to that of their own species. Many species of closely related amphibians have different breeding seasons that prevent hybridization. For example, 5 species of frogs of the genus Rana occur together in most of the eastern United States, but hybrids are rare because the peak breeding time is different from each of them. The structure of the male and female copulatory organs may be incompatible. In many insect and other arthropod groups, the sexual organs, particularly those of the male, are so diverse that they are used as a primary basis for distinguishing species. Hybridization between sheep and goats, for example, usually produces embryos that die in the earliest developmental stages because the genetic complements of the two species are so different that they cannot function together normally in embryonic development. Rana pipens complex of the eastern United States are a group of similar species assumed for a long time to contribute a single species. Careful examination, however, revealed that although the frogs appear similar, successful mating between them is rare because of problems that occur as the fertilized eggs develop. Even when hybrids survive the embryo stage, they may be sterile because the chromosomes derived from the respective parents cannot pair properly during meiosis. By definition, under the biological species concept, species should not interbreed and produce fertile offspring. But in recent years, biologists have detected much greater amounts of interspecies hybridization than was previously thought to occur between populations that seem to coexist as distinct biological entities. In recent years, many cases of substantial hybridization between animal species have been documented. One survey indicated that almost 10% of the world's 9,500 bird species are known to have hybridized in nature. An alternative hypothesis proposes that the distinctions among species are maintained by natural selection. The idea is that each species has adapted to its own specific part of the environment. Stabilizing selection then maintains the species' adaptations. Hybridization has little effect because alleles introduced into one species' gene pool from another species are quickly eliminated by natural selection. Species and populations of organisms that are distinct from one another, co-occurring species, and are interconnected geographically. The biological species concept therefore defines species based on their ability to interbreed. Reproductive isolating mechanisms prevent successful interbreeding between species. The ecological species concept relies on adaptation and natural selection as a force for maintaining separation of species. Thank you for listening to that lecture on speciation. I look forward to seeing you in lecture 14.